The lake was still that morning, so still it almost mirrored the silence between us. My parents stood on the dock, faces bright with plans I hadn't agreed to, voices light with assumptions that pressed down like weights. "Your sister's so excited," Mom said, brushing invisible lint from her sweater. "She already picked out which room will be hers." Her words slid through me like cold water. "My room?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. Dad smiled in that practiced way he used for closing business deals. "You're hardly here no more, sweetheart. You've got the apartment in the city, your company, your travel. The Lakehouse is just sitting empty. It makes sense for Vanessa and the kids to use it for a while." I looked past them at the water, sunlight breaking across the ripples. "Use it," I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. "Or move in." Mom hesitated, then laughed softly, as though the distinction didn't matter. "It's family, honey. We shouldn't be so technical." That was the moment, the exact second, the air changed. They weren't asking. They were informing me. The house I built from nothing, the one I worked overtime and sleepless nights to pay for, was already being spoken about like a shared family asset. I'd paid $515,000 for this place 3 years ago. I'd designed every inch, from the reclaimed oak floors to the custom dock lights that reflected on the water like tiny constellations. This wasn't a lake house. It was a symbol of survival, the physical proof that I had climbed out of the wreckage of being the family disappointment. "Vanessa's kids need space," Mom went on, her tone soft but loaded. "You remember what that's like, right? Growing up without enough." That one landed low, exactly where she wanted it to. I took a breath that felt sharp in my chest. "They can rent somewhere nearby," I said finally. "But they are not living here." Dad's smile faltered. "You're being dramatic. We talking about family?" "No," I said. "We talking about boundaries." Mom's expression tightened. "You're making us sound like strangers." I wanted to tell her that's how it felt, because lately it was. But instead I said nothing. Silence, I've learned, carries its own weight. The wind picked up, rustling the reeds by the dock. The sound filled the space between us, that uneasy, stretching quiet that comes when a truth is about to land. Then Dad spoke the words that always come before he tries to guilt me into compliance. "After everything we've done for you." I cut him off. "You mean after you kicked me out for dropping out of college? Or after you refused to visit when I was working double shifts to pay for this house?" The dock creaked beneath us, the wood shifting like it, too, was uncomfortable. Mom stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You don't have to bring up the past." "The past is exactly what you're trying to move into," I said. "And I'm not letting you." She stared at me like she didn't recognize me, like I'd suddenly become someone ungrateful, unmanageable, foreign. "You're being cruel," she said, the words trembling at the edges. "Your sister cried all night when she found out you said no. She was counting on this." Cruel. That word stung more than I expected. It always does when it comes from her mouth, because in my family, cruel really means not convenient for us. I glanced toward the lake house behind them. The windows glowed gold in the morning sun, my reflection faint in the glass, stronger than the person I used to be, but still shaking a little on the inside. "I'm sorry she's upset," I said finally, "but my answer stands." Dad sighed, long and heavy. "You're impossible, you know that? You've always had to make things harder than they need to be." There it was, the script I knew by heart. I smiled without humor. "And you've always had to make decisions that aren't yours to make." He looked like he might say something else, but the front door opened before he could. Vanessa stepped out, sunglasses perched in her hair, holding a set of keys that made my stomach drop. "Dad gave them to me last week," she said quickly, reading my expression. "We were just going to move our stuff in slowly. I thought you'd be okay with it once you saw how cozy it looked." She waved the keys slightly, a gesture so casual it bordered on mocking. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed level. Give me those. Her hand tightened. You're overreacting. I didn't blink. Vanessa, now. The quiet authority in my tone seemed to surprise her. Slowly, she dropped the keys into my palm. For a second, the weight of the metal felt symbolic, like I was reclaiming something I didn't even know I'd lost. I slipped them into my pocket. You'll get your own set when you buy your own house, I said, and turned toward the driveway. Behind me, I could hear Mom's sharp inhale, Dad's muttered curse, Vanessa's disbelieving laugh. But I kept walking. Every step felt heavy, but necessary. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I reached my car. My hands were steady on the handle, but my chest felt like it might split open. I could feel their eyes on me through the window as I started the engine. The reflection of their shapes, 3 familiar silhouettes, blurred as the car pulled away. Halfway down the road, my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. We'll talk later. Don't do something you'll regret. I looked at the message, then out the windshield, the lake shrinking in my rear-view mirror. I wasn't the one making the mistake. For once, I was walking away before the damage was done. The autumn wind picked up again, scattering gold leaves across the road like confetti at the end of something sacred. I rolled the window down and let the air rush in, cool and clean and new. This wasn't cruelty. This was freedom. And it was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your bones when you've just made a decision that changes everything. I brewed coffee and watched the fog roll across the lake, the pale light softening the sharp ache in my chest. That house had always been my sanctuary, but now, it felt vulnerable, like something precious that could be taken if I didn't protect it. By 8 a.m., I was on the phone with my lawyer. Is this about the property line issue? He asked, half asleep. No, I said. It's about boundaries, but not the kind you can see on a map. I told him everything. My parents' assumptions, Vanessa's key, their attempt to move in without permission. There was a pause on the line, then he sighed. You know, it's funny how often this happens with family. You build something from scratch, and suddenly everyone feels like they helped. His voice was steady, rational. I'll draft a no-occupancy clause. If anyone tries to stay there without your consent, you'll have it in writing. We'll add security and property access terms too. When I hung up, the knot in my stomach eased slightly. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. I drove to the house later that morning, the gravel popping under my tires. Every turn of the key in the front door felt like an act of defiance. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of cedar and lake breeze. The morning light filtered through the windows, painting the hardwood in amber streaks. I walked room to room, checking locks, testing windows, opening closets that still carried echoes of laughter from the few friends I'd trusted enough to bring here. But this wasn't about sentiment anymore. This was about reclaiming space, physical and emotional. When I reached the living room, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the mantel, next to a photo of me breaking ground on the house, was a framed picture of my family at Vanessa's engagement party. Someone had put it there recently. I picked it up slowly. My mother's smile was perfect in that picture, but it never reached her eyes. Vanessa was beaming, her fiancé's arm looped tightly around her waist. My father's hand rested on my shoulder, the same shoulder he would later turn coldly away from when I dropped out of college. For years, I had tried to earn their pride. I'd thought the house, the business, the success would finally make them see me as more than their mistake child. But now I understood. People who need to control you will never celebrate your independence. They don't want your success. They want your submission. I placed the photo face down. Outside, a car door slammed. My stomach clenched as I glanced out the window. Vanessa's SUV sat in the driveway, trunk open, boxes stacked neatly inside. She didn't even knock. Just walked up the steps like she owned them. I opened the door before she could. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. She froze, one foot on the porch. We're just dropping off a few things. Mom said you'd come around. I crossed my arms. You're mistaken. I didn't come around. I drew a line. Her brows furrowed, a flash of irritation replacing her practiced sweetness. You're really going to do this? To your own family? Family doesn't take without asking, I said evenly. They don't move in uninvited. Vanessa's tone turned sharp. You're so ungrateful. Do you know how much Mom and Dad sacrificed for you? And now you're acting like some kind of millionaire gatekeeper. Her words hung in the air, thick with resentment. I smiled faintly. You're right. I am a gatekeeper. Because this is my gate. My house. My life. The keys jingled in my pocket as I stepped closer. Now get your boxes out of my driveway. Her mouth fell open. You've changed. I had to, I said softly. You made sure of it. She stared at me for a long second, her face twisting with something between disbelief and anger. Then she turned on her heel, muttering under her breath. The car door slammed again. Gravel spun beneath her tires as she drove away. I watched until her tail lights disappeared down the road. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was raw. But it was mine. Later that evening, I installed a smart security system. Cameras, motion sensors, automatic locks. I even changed the access code twice, just in case. Each beep of the keypad sounded like a heartbeat, steady and certain. By nightfall, I sat on the couch with my laptop, finishing up contracts for an upcoming wedding event, one of the biggest my company had ever landed. It felt almost poetic. While my family was busy trying to take what I had, I was out there building more. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman they once called a failure now owned one of the fastest-growing luxury wedding brands in the state. The same daughter they'd dismissed as directionless now designed dream venues for people who valued her vision. And yet, they still couldn't see me. Not really. The phone buzzed again, this time, a message from Mom. I heard you change the locks. Vanessa's very hurt. We raised you better than this. I stayed at the screen, jaw tight. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed. You raised me to please everyone but myself. That ends now. I didn't wait for a reply. When I stepped outside, the lake shimmered under a full moon, perfectly still again. My reflection looked different in the water, calmer, but firmer. For years, I'd thought love meant giving in, staying quiet, keeping the peace. But sometimes love has to mean locking the door. Because peace doesn't come from pleasing others, it comes from protecting yourself. And as I stood there, the cool air brushing against my face, I finally understood something I'd spent a lifetime chasing. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't scream or demand to be noticed. It's quiet, like the sound of a lock clicking into place at last. By the weekend, the whispers had started. It began with a Facebook post, innocent on the surface, but sharp underneath. My mother had shared a photo of my sister and her fiancé standing in front of my Lakehouse, captioned, "Family means opening your doors with love, not closing them with pride." Within hours, her friends were commenting hearts and praying hands. You raised such a kind family. Some people forget where they came from. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding in my ears. It wasn't just a post. It was a performance. A carefully worded attack designed to make me look like the villain. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same headlines running through my mind. Selfish daughter turns on family. Too good for her own parents. The same narrative they'd built my whole life, now repackaged for social media sympathy. By morning, it had spread. An old neighbor texted me, asking if I was really charging rent to my own parents. Someone from high school messaged, "What happened? You used to be so nice." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I took a drive. The lake road wound through tall pines and open air, the kind of silence that makes you confront everything you've been avoiding. When I reached the overlook, I pulled over and let the engine idle. For a long moment, I just sat there, breathing. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to be the version of myself that pleased them, the obedient daughter, the helpful sister, the one who didn't make waves. And how each time I achieved something, they found a way to make it smaller. When I dropped out of college to build my company, they said it was a phase. When I bought my first property, they said it was luck. When I finished the Lakehouse, they said I'd gotten carried away. Now, standing in that same house, they wanted to erase all of it, to move in, to take credit, to control the one place that symbolized my independence. And when I said no, I became the villain. I drove back home with a strange calm settling in my chest. Not the shaky calm of someone suppressing anger, but the quiet certainty that comes when you stop apologizing for doing the right thing. When I pulled into the driveway, a car I didn't recognize was parked outside. The trunk was open, boxes stacked inside. My parents were standing near the porch with Vanessa, all of them mid-argument. Mom's voice rose as I stepped out. "We're not asking for much, Iris. Just a few weeks until they find a bigger place. You're being dramatic." Vanessa crossed her arms, glaring. "You act like you're some big shot now. It's just a house." I laughed, softly, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "It's not just a house. It's my life's work. The one thing I built when no one believed in me." Dad finally spoke, his tone clipped and cold. "You're embarrassing yourself. We raised you better than this." I met his eyes, steady. "No. You raised me to obey. I taught myself how to build." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vanessa turned away, muttering, "Unbelievable." I took a step closer, lowering my voice so it carried weight. "You tried to humiliate me online. You told people I abandoned you. You turned my own neighbors against me. But you didn't think I'd see the cameras, did you?" My mother blinked. "What cameras?" I nodded toward the corner of the porch. "The ones recording this conversation right now." Vanessa's face drained of color. "You're recording us." "Just protecting myself," I said evenly. "You taught me to expect the worst." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that exposes every lie. Dad clenched his jaw. "You think this makes you look good? You think people will side with you?" I smiled faintly. "No, I don't need anyone to side with me. I just need peace." They didn't respond. Vanessa stormed toward the car, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. My mother followed, shaking her head like she couldn't recognize the daughter standing in front of her. As the car disappeared down the road, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from release. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the moon ripple over the lake. I thought about the word cruel, how they'd thrown it at me like a weapon. But the truth was, saying no wasn't cruel. It was necessary, because the people who love you shouldn't make you feel guilty for having boundaries. By morning, I had a plan. If they wanted to turn the story against me, I'd tell my own, not with bitterness, but with truth. I opened my business Instagram, posted a single photo of the lake house at sunrise, and wrote, "Built from nothing, paid for in full, owned with pride. No one gets to rewrite that." No names, no drama, just fact. Within hours, the post went viral. Comments flooded in, not pity, but understanding. Strangers shared their own stories about manipulative families, about finally setting boundaries. It was like a quiet uprising of people who'd had enough. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. That night, as I read the messages, I realized something powerful. They'd tried to shame me into silence, but in doing so, they'd handed me a story that resonated far beyond my small town. They wanted control, but what they gave me was freedom and a platform. The irony wasn't lost on me, and as I closed my laptop, I whispered to the empty house, "You'll never live here, but you'll live with what you did." The lake shimmered back at me, reflecting my words like a promise. The invitation came 3 days later, a text from my mother, brief and polite, like nothing had happened. Family dinner, Sunday 6 p.m. We'd like to talk. No drama, please. No drama. Those 2 words were almost funny, considering how much of it they'd stowed up. For an hour, I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen, wondering if I should just block the number and move on. But a part of me wanted closure. Not the kind that came with apologies. I'd stopped expecting those, but the kind that came with finally saying what needed to be said. So I agreed. By Sunday evening, I was standing outside my parents' house again. The same porch light flickered overhead, the same chime of wind against the flagpole. Everything smelled of Sunday dinners and unspoken expectations. When I stepped inside, the familiar weight of that house hit me, the scent of roast chicken, the hum of the old refrigerator, the soft clink of silverware being set on china. It was as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had. "Gabrielle!" My mother called from the dining room, her voice syrupy with forced warmth. "You look tired. Working too much again?" I smiled politely. Something like that. Dad stood at the head of the table, as always, carving meat with that same quiet authority. Vanessa and Mark were already seated, her face perfectly made up, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I almost laughed at how staged it looked, as if they were posing for a family portrait. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, pretending civility, but the air was thick with the things no one wanted to say. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa set down her fork and leaned forward. "Look, I think we should just clear the air. Everyone's been so emotional lately." I took a sip of water, waiting. Mom jumped in, right on cue. "We all said things we didn't mean. But we're family, Gabrielle. That has to count for something." Dad nodded. "You can't let pride get in the way of helping your sister. She's going through a lot." There it was, the trap. The same emotional bait they'd used my entire life. Pride, guilt, obligation. I placed my napkin on the table. "You mean the same pride that built that Lakehouse? The one you all dismissed until you wanted to move in?" Dad sighed, his tone slipping into patronizing calm. "That's not what this is about. This is about compassion." Vanessa smiled thinly. "And forgiveness. You embarrassed Mom and Dad online. You need to fix that." I looked at her, really looked. The perfect makeup, the poised shoulders, the smug confidence of someone who still thought she had control. "Forgiveness isn't a one-way street," I said quietly. Mom's eyes narrowed. "You're making this harder than it has to be. We just want peace." "No," I said. "You want compliance. There's a difference." The room fell silent. Dad set his carving knife down with a loud clink. "Gabrielle, you've been difficult since you were a teenager. Always questioning authority. Always making things harder for everyone. I thought age would bring maturity." "Funny," I said softly. "I thought parenthood would bring accountability." He stiffened. Vanessa's eyes darted between us, sensing the shift. I leaned back in my chair, calm, deliberate. "Let me guess. This dinner wasn't about making peace. You've already told everyone I'm unstable, haven't you? That's the story you're running with." No one spoke, but the flicker in my mother's eyes was answer enough. I continued, my voice even. "That's why I brought something." I reached into my bag and slid a small envelope across the table. My dad hesitated before picking it up. Inside were neatly printed copies of emails and text threads, screenshots, timestamps, the full paper trail. Messages between Vanessa and a local realtor about listing my Lakehouse for short-term rental as soon as we move in. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "What is this?" I looked at Vanessa. "That's what you were doing at the outlet mall, right? Meeting your agent." Her face drained of color. "That's not. You're twisting it." "Stop," I said quietly. "For once in your life, stop lying." The silence that followed was total. Dad's hands trembled as he skimmed the pages. Mom sat frozen, her expression collapsing under the weight of realization. You were going to rent out my house, I said, and keep the money. You didn't want to borrow it. You wanted to profit from it. Vanessa pushed back her chair, eyes blazing. You think you're better than everyone. You always have. I was trying to help my family. No, I interrupted, my voice low but sharp. You were trying to help yourself. Just like always. Dad looked between us, his authority unraveling. Is this true? Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stood. You called me cruel. You called me dramatic. You made me the villain because I said no. But the truth is, you never wanted a home. You wanted control. My mother reached out, her voice breaking. Gabrielle, please. I stepped back. You had your chance to be honest. Now you can live with what you built. I turned toward the door. No one followed. The clatter of silverware was the only sound left behind, the sound of a lie collapsing under its own weight. Outside, the night air was cold, clean, alive. I stood on the porch, breathing in the kind of peace that only comes after you've burned the bridge you once begged to cross. I looked up at the stars and whispered to myself, that's the last dinner I'll ever have to survive. As I walked to my car, a message buzzed on my phone, a DM from a wedding influencer who'd seen my Lakehouse post. Your story hit home. Ever thought about starting a wedding brand? I'd collaborate in a heartbeat. I smiled. Maybe this was how rebirth began, not with fireworks, but with clarity. 3 months have passed since that dinner. The air feels lighter now, cleaner, somehow. My mornings no longer begin with unread messages or guilt-flavored apologies. Instead, I wake to sunlight spilling across the Lakehouse windows, glimmering over the water like a promise I finally kept to myself. The renovation is complete. Every inch of this house tells my story now. Not the version my parents approved of, but the one I built through patience, debt, and determination. The new glass doors open out to a cedar deck that smells faintly of rain and sawdust. The living room carries warmth, not ghosts. And the best part? Silence. No footsteps I didn't invite. No arguments echoing down the hall. Just the hum of life. Mine. Uninterrupted. I run my fingers over the marble countertop. Still cool from the morning air. My contractor, Miguel, did exceptional work. The space gleams with soft light, open and strong, like the version of myself that finally emerged from beneath years of family noise. A notification pings on my phone. Subject, partnership opportunity, the Lakehouse edit. It's from an interior design magazine that found my story online. They want to feature the renovation, not as a tale of revenge, but as one of resilience. I smile, because that's the truth of it now. This house isn't a monument to bitterness. It's proof that boundaries can bloom into beauty. When the article came out, the title read, "She Said No, and Built Her Freedom Instead." It went viral overnight. Thousands of women shared it, commenting things like, "This feels too familiar," and finally someone said it out loud. For years, I'd been made to feel like boundaries were cruel. Now, the world was calling them strength. A few weeks after the article published, I got another message. This time, from Vanessa. We saw the story. Mom's embarrassed. Dad won't admit it, but he's proud. I don't know what to say except, "I'm sorry." I stayed at her words for a long time, the way you stare at a door that used to be locked, wondering whether to open it again. I typed and erased half a dozen replies before settling on one simple sentence. "I wish you peace, too." Then I muted the chat. Not blocked, just muted. Because peace doesn't always mean closing every door. Sometimes, it just means knowing which ones not to walk through anymore. Later that evening, I hosted my first private event at the Lakehouse, an intimate wedding for a small, young couple who couldn't afford the big city venues. I offered it to them for free, just to see joy in this space again. As I watched the bride twirl under strings of fairy lights, laughter spilling across the deck, something inside me softened. The irony wasn't lost on me, that after all the drama about family weddings, My house was now hosting them. Only this time, I was the one in control. Miguel approached with a champagne flute. "You did good, Gabby. This place feels alive again." I smiled. It's the first time it ever truly belonged to me. That night, after the guests left, I stood barefoot on the dock, watching moonlight ripple across the water. My reflection stared back, older, quieter, freer. I thought about the years I spent trying to earn their approval, the dinners I endured, the unspoken expectations, the way I used to shrink myself to fit inside their comfort zones. And for what? So they could keep taking without asking? Now, I didn't need their validation. My worth didn't depend on being invited to their table anymore, because I'd built my own, handcrafted, marble-topped, and set beside the lake. Sometimes peace doesn't roar. Sometimes it's the quiet click of your own front door locking behind you, knowing no one can use the spare key again. The following weekend, an invitation arrived in the mail, thick envelope, embossed lettering, addressed in my mother's elegant handwriting. "Vanessa and Mark invite you to celebrate their vow renewal, summer 2026. I laughed when I saw it, not cruelly, just softly, because it no longer hurt. I placed it on my desk, beneath a framed photo of the Lakehouse mid-renovation. Maybe I'd go. Maybe not. Either way, it wasn't about them anymore. The next morning, I sat at my desk with coffee steaming beside my laptop. My inbox pinged again, another message from a major event network wanting to partner on the Lakehouse Collective. An upscale, women-owned wedding venue brand built on empowerment, creativity, and independence. The irony made me smile. The same dramatic, ungrateful daughter they dismissed had just turned her heartbreak into a brand the industry now wanted to invest in. I signed the contract that afternoon, using the same Montblanc pen I once used for architecture projects, the one my father gave me years ago with the words, "Use it wisely." For the first time, I truly did. When sunset came, I took my coffee out to the deck, where the lake caught the fading light like molten gold. The quiet pressed close around me, soft and whole. I whispered into the evening, not for anyone to hear, but for myself. I'm done being the family's second choice. Peace didn't arrive as an apology from them. It arrived as a promise to myself, that I would never again shrink for anyone's comfort, never again call obligation love, and never again let guilt dictate where I belonged. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance. Not money, not approval, freedom. As the sky darkened and the first stars shimmered above the lake, I felt the quietest, deepest truth settle into my bones. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't dramatic. I was finally enough.